The Mendip Hills in Somerset, an area of outstanding natural beauty, is under threat from gas companies planning to exploit the gas deposits below. The process they will use, hydraulic fracturing or fracking, has transformed the landscape in many parts of the United States and Australia, and contaminated the drinking water and air with highly toxic chemicals and carcinogenic and radioactive gases. Despite the risks, the coalition government claims shale gas can make the UK self-sufficient in energy and help boost the economy.
Shale gas is part of the future and we will make it happen.
And Lord John Brown, Non-Executive Director of the Cabinet Office and Chairman of Quadrilla, one of the companies that stands to profit most from the dash for gas, has stated he'll invest whatever it takes. Lord Brown has appointed non-executive directors to the board of each government department. There are 4 Brown appointees at the Treasury, the government's most powerful department. 3 more are found at the Department of Energy and Climate Change, which grants oil and gas licences and oversees the industry. At DEFRA, which oversees the Environment Agency, Brown has overseen the appointment of 4 non-executives. In fact, hundreds of government officials owe their position to Lord Brown. One of them, non-executive Treasury member Baroness Hogg, is the independent director of BG Group, who are responsible for major environmental malpractice in Australia. The government have sold 4 petroleum exploration and development licences, or PEDLs, covering 650 square kilometres of Somerset and including the Mendip Hills. The Mendips are laced with springs and rivers, providing irrigation for farming and drinking water for Bristol and the surrounding area.
If we start messing with the geology and we start messing with the water that's coming through that, then that will affect farming right the way across the Cheddar Valley.
3 of the PEDLs are owned by tiny exploration company UK Methane in partnership with Australian firm Eden Energy.
In reality, they are simply the pioneers. Once they are able to establish their exploration wells and then turn them into production wells, and once it's pretty much a given that there's X trillion cubic feet of gas in that area, then the company will be sold to one of the majors.
In fact, Centrica, major investors of British Gas, announced in June 2013 that they will invest £100 million in Quadrilla since they completed exploratory drilling in Lancashire.
We've got a good idea of the coal that's there.
At a public meeting in Bath, UK Methane announced their plans to commence exploratory drilling in Stoneaston, 2 miles from the source of the River Chew, and Compton Martin, just 1 mile from Chew Lake. The process they will use, known as coalbed methane extraction, involves drilling into coal seams and pumping water out to the surface, thereby releasing the gas from the coal. Fracking is often used to enhance the process.
Fracking's been around for about 70 years, and initially it was just pumping generally water and sand under enormous pressure. But over the last certainly 20-25 years, the industry now mixes the water with a cocktail of chemicals.
A 2007 US study identified 200 chemicals used in Colorado fracking operations, of which 90% are toxic.
Some survey work that was done in the United States with some of the companies that are voluntarily reporting showed that 1 in 3 hydraulic fracturing was using a carcinogen, that is a chemical that causes cancer. The most commonly used chemical is a thing called methanol. It damages the central nervous system. It can lead to a whole load of neurotoxic symptoms, things that make it difficult to think straight. There's other chemicals like ethylene glycol, which is known to be a reproductive toxin. And for women who produce ethylene glycol in a factory, they have a much greater rate of spontaneous abortions. There's another one called 2-butoxyethanol, which is a very persistent reproductive toxin, very toxic to aquatic organisms. That's just an example of 3 or 4, but I could give you 20 or 30.
For commercial reasons, the manufacturers of the frack fluid are not required to divulge the exact ingredients of their product.
And so for many governments, when they say, we know what the company's using, they don't, because the company themselves don't know. They only know the product name. We were at an OECD meeting in Paris on this issue, and what was quite clear was neither the governments or the people that are using the chemicals know exactly what is in them. So we're really using an unassessed, unquantified mixture of carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, irritants. So it really is a chemical cocktail that goes into the earth, of which up to 40% remains there, and we don't know what it does.
The apologists for the industry will say, yeah, but it's water rich. And this is a wonderful PR term. It's like saying rat poison is sugar rich.
Between 0.5 and 5% of fracking fluid is made up of chemicals.
If the frack job is consuming 1 million gallons of water, that's anything up to 50,000 gallons of potential high toxicity being pumped into the geology that we have no way of determining where it ends up. And it can take years for this contaminated fluid to find its way into the underground water aquifers.
And it's not just the chemicals pumped into the ground that are toxic.
When you take out shale gas or coal bed methane, you release what are called naturally occurring radioactive materials, or norms. And so that gets into the water, and get into the air, it can get into the soil.
The bulk of Australian coal seam gas exploitation has taken place in Queensland, where over 3,000 wells blight the landscape and pollute the air and water. The Queensland Mine Department reports that nearly half of the wells tested in the Tara oil field show signs of leakage. The wells are owned by Baroness Hogg's BG Group. Another company, Origin, have caused the River Condamine to constantly bubble with methane and other gases.
And obviously it's very noticeable in rivers and streams. On the land, it's not so obvious. And because methane is odourless, you're actually breathing a non-indigenous mix of gases without realising it.
This meter detects combustible gases such as methane, benzene and ethanol.
That's unbelievable. That is actually scary.
Like many that live near the gas fields, Brian Monk's family in Chinchilla, Queensland, are fed a constant diet of methane and other gases.
I've pushed it your way more. There we go, it's come back, it's still in the air.
Not from cow farts.
Koala farts.
Not
So
koala
is this
farts.
methane
cow breaths.
only?
No,
Oh,
10 gases.
The Environmental Protection Agency in America used infrared cameras to show volatile gases, invisible to the naked eye, being pumped into the atmosphere during the drilling process. The Monk family have suffered a range of symptoms consistent with exposure to these gases, including bloody noses, breathing difficulty, and severe headaches. The monks also discovered their water borehole had become contaminated.
look at that.
One of the CSG companies, Arrow Energy, had to acknowledge that they had contaminated their monitoring bores with what's called BTEX, which is benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene and xylene, a group of very nasty chemicals. You can still find them as contaminants in drilling fluids, but they are also released as they are natural contaminants in the coal.
One day the grandchildren were in the bath and they started screaming and they had a red ring. Everything that was in the water was burnt. The doctor found that I had toluene in my system and the solvents and chemicals that are freely used in not just the fracking process but the drilling process as well.
Brian asked the LNG Enforcement Unit to test his water.
We're treating your issue seriously and we're trying to investigate what the cause of the problem is.
Yeah, I'm getting no gas measurements. Two different issues in one thing.
When the inspectors ignored the gas bubbles, Brian's son David tried to point them out.
All those vapours.
Yeah, I'm getting no gas measurements.
What would be the piece of equipment you'd go to a coal seam gas well and detect the gas?
We would use something like this GMI.
Something like what you've got. So can we get that? Have you got that working yet?
No, it's turned off now.
Have a look, it's a breezy day. You're not going to get any measurements up here. It's exactly the same as the bastards when they first sampled it. They sampled on a windy day and well away from the source. Every time they went near the source, it did this. So toxic to make our grandchildren unwell. So if you think the coal seam gas industry is safe, if you think it's regulated, if you think it's policed, look at the bubbles and have a listen to the machine. Wake up to yourselves.
The document that had to be produced by BG clearly shows that they deliberately fracked up into the level of our aquifer. And a scientist that's done the most recent tests found an incredible amount of evidence to indicate that they've impacted straight into our water bore. And the government actually sanitised the report.
Gas companies have found ever more inventive ways to dispose of the millions of gallons of contaminated water. The BG Group have been caught spraying it on the roads by locals. Another process, known as flaring, involves burning off the contaminants into the atmosphere. They have also been poured into evaporation pits with the express purpose of evaporating the contaminants into the air.
Those chemicals, again, neurotoxicants. People complain when they stepped out of their automobiles or out of their homes that they got a whiff of some air, they collapsed, they shook, they seem to have loss of memory.
This is the BG Group Kenya station, where volatile organic compounds from gas flaring and evaporation pits, a mile long, have caused a cluster of illnesses at the Tara estate just 4 miles away.
They're suffering everything from chronic, severe headaches, nausea, dizziness, lack of concentration. The children are suffering rashes, numbness and tingling in their hands and their feet. They are a shocking cluster of symptoms, which is very debilitating, particularly for small children. And we have clusters of children under 5 with these symptoms. They're very consistent with the symptoms we're seeing in Pennsylvania, with communities that are exposed to shale gas there.
In Colorado, as in Australia and the UK, landowners don't own the mineral rights under their property. This means gas companies can drill horizontally under their land to get at the gas below.
When they were drilling, we could feel it grinding underneath the ground, under our house, and then we'd feel these explosions. And it would shake dishes and rattle pictures, and it drilled for the longest time. And the pit was even closer, and they'd burn it. They would just flare it off. This is before any problems, before we lived in Rifle.
It's been almost 15 years now.
I'm 54, and she's 59. Chris would get in the shower, and her skin turned bright red. I think it was 96. Her skin, it was burning on fire. She would swell. I was afraid she was going to bleed to death. She'd wake up in the morning, and she would be covered in blood, and her nose would be bleeding.
Well, around 50% of the chemicals cause such things as kidney damage, cardiovascular problems. And then the next, and very troublesome, are the neurological effects.
I started throwing up and just wanting to just hold my body because I feel like something's happening inside of me, it's not normal.
I think there's no question that people are getting sick from the environmental effects of oil and gas exploration and production throughout the United States. And what's striking is when you ask them what their symptoms are, it's the same in one area as it is in another area.
Physicians are unable to diagnose the cause of these illnesses due to secrecy surrounding the chemicals used by the industry.
In Colorado, the MDs have been instructed not to report any negative health effects that they believe to be associated with living over a gas field. So clearly, by definition, there is a recognition that the fracking industry is having a negative impact on the health of the residents.
In the face of such damning evidence, the American Natural Gas Association has launched a PR offensive, employing the same PR agency that scotched the link between smoking and cancer through disinformation and faulty science.
There is not any proof that there's been anything harmful in the fracking fluids that are used to fracture the wells. I have fracking fluid taken right out of a fracking truck in my office. I've had it in my mouth, I've tasted it, and I'm just fine. I think it's just so important people understand that we live here and love it also. Why would we mess in our nest?
At an oil and gas industry conference, directors laid bare the tactics they were prepared to use to deal with growing public dissent.
Let's talk about this plan. Download the U.S. Army/Marine Corps counterinsurgency manual, because we are dealing with an insurgency.
We have several former PSYOPs folks that work for us at Range, very much having that understanding of PSYOPs in the Army and in the Middle East has applied very helpfully here in Pennsylvania.
The oil and gas industry has spent $2.9 billion lobbying politicians.
In 2005, Dick Cheney instructed the Senate to introduce what has become known as the Halliburton loophole, which effectively exempts the oil industry from having to report any contamination of water caused by the fracking process. It's an absolute statement of acknowledgement that contamination probably would take place.
The United Nations Environment Programme put out a global environmental alert, and they said that unconventional gas would have unavoidable environmental impacts. Some would occur because the technology wasn't used correctly, but others will occur despite the correct use of the technology. So what they clearly said in that alert was that you can regulate the industry and make it safer, but you cannot make it safe.
Despite this, more than 60% of the UK landmass is under threat from fracking. In June 2013, the British Geological Survey estimated that there was enough recoverable gas in the north of England to meet the UK energy needs for 30 years. A polarised debate about the pros and cons of unconventional gas rages on. James Verdon, who specialises in microseismic monitoring of hydraulic fracturing, is frustrated by what he sees as extremist views on fracking.
It's more like a slagging match between these groups that just slag each other off. And in the middle somewhere you have the geologists, you have the scientists, you have the British Geological Survey, you have the Royal Society, that are actually producing the science that says shale gas can be extracted, the appropriate regulations need to be in place.
The Royal Society, a proponent of GM food, has Lord John Brown as a fellow.
I think academics in that respect are quite important because they are much more trusted by the public than, the guy from the oil company isn't going to be trusted. The guy from the university who's funded by the government is going to be more trusted. There's no bottom line to protect. There's just facts that you want to put out there.
But the geologists supplying the facts often have close ties to the oil and gas industry.
There's nothing inherent about the shale gas process that is going to lead to problems.
When it does happen, it seems to be a really significant impact on the local people, so we want to be pretty sure that we're going to avoid this problem.
Well, the impacts can sometimes be exaggerated. In many cases, there may be hydrocarbons, so gas deposits in the ground at shallow depths anyway. The most famous one in the film Gasland, isotopic testing on the gas from that tap shows it's from a shallow origin. It's not from a deep source.
In fact, Schlumberger's report shows shallow gas can migrate into aquifers through faulty cement casing. And in the same film, the gas that contaminated tap water 1 mile away was confirmed by the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission as from a deep source, therefore caused by drilling. The COGCC documents several cases of water contamination by gas from deep levels, known as thermogenic gas. And in a peer-reviewed study in northeastern Pennsylvania, an area of intensive shale gas extraction, 82% of drinking water samples contained methane. Methane levels were 6 times higher for homes within 1 kilometre of a gas well.
So if you've got a large number of wells and a low probability of failure, you can still get to a point where you're likely to have a positive number of failures.
I certainly see your point. It's not that there's a set probability that a certain number of wells would always fail.
The Schlumberger Oilfield Review 2003 shows 6% of wells have integrity issues immediately after drilling. The figure rises to 50% over 15 years. All wells leak eventually, even without fracking.
There's an awful lot of wells, both onshore and offshore the UK at the moment, and we don't see, any problems really.
Another oil industry document shows 34% of UK North Sea wells have integrity issues. Cement failure caused the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010.
Where you've seen problems in America, it's almost always traceable back to companies trying to take shortcuts. Certainly there are big differences in the regulatory regimes where companies can get away with things in the US that they can't get away with here.
Quadrilla Resources Holding are the first company to drill for shale gas in the UK. Many are concerned by the environmental record of the company chairman, Lord John Brown.
When John Brown was Chief Executive Officer of BP, he was renowned for a mantra which was profit, profit, profit. And if that meant cutting corners on health and safety, then that was acceptable to him.
Quadrilla has drilled 4 exploratory wells on the Ribble Estuary in Lancashire, and there have already been a number of incidents.
The initial fracking activity was not actually licensed in any way by the Environment Agency. While they were conscious of the fact that it was a drilling activity and there was some wastewater, I don't think they had necessarily appreciated fully the implications of it being a radioactive material. I don't want to exaggerate the point, it's slightly radioactive, but it's radioactive material, so it has to be treated under the radioactive substances regulations. Some of this material from the initial 2 fracks was actually taken to a large sewage treatment works in Manchester, which really had no capacity to handle radioactive materials of this kind. And so the radioactivity was likely to pass through the works and end up in the Manchester Ship Canal, which is a major waterway in the northwest of England. The actual permits, as proposed by the Environment Agency, were not controlling the activity in any substantive way at all. For example, although it referred to controls on the venting and flaring of gas from the site, it actually didn't specify any specific limits within those controls. So it was a kind of open-ended control, meaningless in the sense that it didn't actually have any specific limits within it.
Hydraulic fracturing has been in use for 40 or 50 years in the oil industry. It's the exact same process, only it's scaled up from what we used to do 30 or 40 years ago.
In reality, slick water horizontal fracking is a new process, and it's not one that we're familiar with in the UK at all.
The Department of Energy and Climate Change granted the original exploratory licence to Cuadrilla in 2007.
The original licenses make no reference whatsoever to fracking. They use the very simple word get when they refer to how the operator will obtain the gas from the ground.
The Health and Safety Executive regulate the safety of workers on the site and the public around the site. They are also responsible for well integrity, but have never physically inspected any of Cuadrilla's wells.
All of their regulations and all of their procedures are actually written in order to control and understand and manage a North Sea gas platform, which of course is completely different when you're talking about an on-land, inland, in urban and residential areas operation.
On April 1st, 2011, a minor earthquake hit Poulton-le-Fylde, just east of Blackpool. The epicentre was just 500 metres from Cuadrilla's Priest Hall well. The quake measured 2.3 on the Richter scale and was felt 8 miles away in Lytham St Anne's. Geza Tarjani claims his house was damaged by the quake.
This was the damage that was caused on April 1st. If we go through to the bathroom, which is the other side of this wall, so these are the walls that connect in. Got cracks up here on the wall, goes right down into the tiles. And they follow all the way and then down into the corner, and you can see there's also a split in the tile on that side as well. As time went on, we found out that it was Cuadrilla that had caused it, after initially saying it could be nothing to do with them.
They did initially deny completely that they could possibly have caused earthquakes. They denied that earthquakes had ever been linked to any fracking activity anywhere, which again was completely untrue because fracking and earthquakes had been linked several years before in America.
The events in themselves aren't any risk to property or damage or anything. Obviously they're a big surprise because 30,000 shale gas wells drilled in the US, no seismicity.
There has been a remarkable increase in earthquakes of magnitude 3 Richter and greater since widespread fracking started in the US, culminating in a 6-fold increase over 20th century levels in 2011. After a further earthquake on May the 27th, Cuadrilla were asked to commission a study by DEC.
There was no regulatory power for the government to stop the operator actually fracking. It was if you like, a gentleman's, if I could use that term, a gentleman's agreement that they would hold off any further fracking until they've figured out exactly what had caused these earthquakes.
The report stated it is highly probable that the hydraulic fracturing of Cuadrilla's Priest Hall well did trigger a number of minor seismic events. John Powney grew concerned when he discovered Cuadrilla planned to drill for gas in the field surrounding his property.
We live off-grid. We also produce our own water from a borehole, and it's because of that that I originally got concerned when I heard that shale gas was coming to this area. This area particularly is heavily involved in agriculture, and we believe that should any fracking fluid get into the environment, that will be a serious threat. So I got involved with a local pressure group called Riblastery Against Fracking, and I've been studying the industry for probably a year and a half.
The damage was at 8,480 feet to 8,640 feet.
That is what that report is, the deck report.
But it doesn't
tell you that, no. The site at Priest Hall was originally drilled as an exploration project. It's one vertical drill, and then they took 6 fractures off that one vertical. When it was during those fractures that the 2 seismic events were recorded, and that was because they unknowingly injected the fluid into a natural adjacent fault. I think it's important people should realise that at Priest Hall 50 seismic events were recorded during just 6 fracking treatments. And the well was damaged while those events took place, raising concerns over gas and fluid migration to higher levels.
Quadrilla didn't inform DEC of the casing damage until 6 months after the event. The Energy Minister at the time, Charles Hendry, wrote to Lord Brown stating, "Quadrilla failed to recognise the significance of casing deformation, and that the failure to report it discloses weaknesses in Quadrilla's performance as licensee." Within months, Hendry was sacked and replaced by John Hayes, who said he was too busy to visit the site.
Quadrilla suggests it's unlikely that these events will reoccur. However, the British Geological Survey disagree with that, and they say that future drilling in the Bowland Shale is likely to produce seismic activity.
In order to prevent future events, the BGS recommended Quadrilla set up a traffic light system which halts drilling once seismic activity reaches a certain threshold.
Quadrilla suggested that the future threshold for seismic activity should be set at 1.7 magnitude. That figure would also carry a 0.9 magnitude post-event rise, meaning that for operational purposes 2.6 magnitude would be what they would be needing to work at to make shale gas commercially viable. The British Geological Survey suggests that that is far too high, and they have said that 0.5 magnitude threshold would be much more acceptable. However, they say that that 0.5 is only for the next few operations, and it can be adjusted over time to a possible future 3 magnitude maximum. So our concerns would be, in the short term, the public will be appeased by potentially low seismic thresholds, but in the future these thresholds will have to be a lot higher to make sure that the investors get their return from high gas yields. When you're talking about a commercial site which is going to have 10 vertical wells with probably 8 or so horizontal legs per vertical, you'll be talking about hundreds of fracking treatments. Wherever the shale beds can be found, every 1 to 2 miles there will be a multi-well site. So it's quite clear that when we're talking about thousands of wells and thousands of fracks, that seismic activity is going to be a part of shale gas extraction.
And thousands of fracks will inevitably lead to a greater risk of well failure and water contamination. But seismicity is not the only concern residents have.
The fracking pad was allowed to go within 1,500 metres of a school. This is pure madness. When the flowback water comes back up the well, that's when methane can be released. Those children would have been breathing that in.
When Quadrilla were ordered to stop dumping untreated radioactive waste into Davy Hume treatment works, 18,000 gallons remained on their Priest Hall site.
We went onto the site yesterday. There was nothing left on that site. The 18,000 gallons has gone without a permit. Another question, where has it gone? And what they're attempting to do now is cap the well, and that's going to erase any information. We don't know how much fracking fluid is down there, we don't know where that fracking fluid is going, we don't know if it's migrated up the fault line, we don't know whereabouts the damage is on the pipeline. These are questions that we're not had answered. And there is no regulation. The Health and Safety Executive have not visited that site in over 2 years.
We're obviously very concerned about where
wastewater tankers containing these chemicals and radioactive materials will be transported to through communities onto busy roads, and how they will be treated and disposed of.
The proposal from the operator is that it's handled by a small company in Preston who have little or no experience of handling this kind of radioactive material. Nor are they prepared to say, as operators or indeed the Environment Agency, where this material is going to be treated.
The second failure is a well they drilled on Anna's Road, the cement wasn't set, they lost a drill bit and they had to abandon the well. It's just a farce. This company is supposed to be cutting edge.
So despite all the claims that regulation in this country is significantly better than other countries, we don't have the evidence and the details to give us the confidence that it is the case.
In the wake of local concern, Quadrilla have embarked on a campaign to win hearts and minds.
This chemical here, which is a friction reducer, and I'm going to put in approximately the amount that would go into a typical frac treatment.
What the fracking companies was telling the people over here, through literature going through doors, that we've since found out and had the ASA check out, that were lies basically. And 6 of those lies were upheld, that they could substantiate that it could be done safely, that it was going to bring in thousands of jobs. So the ASA backed up 6 points on that.
The government and various companies involved in the shale gas industry are proposing that communities would receive benefits to have the shale gas industry in their local area. And one of the chief executives has suggested that they would receive extra money, for example, for police officers and for teachers and nurses, and we think this is an appalling suggestion. The serious impacts that shale gas poses on water, on air, on the local economy can't possibly be compensated.
In August 2012, UK Methane announced they would be commencing exploratory drilling in Keynsham on the River Avon, just 8 miles from the World Heritage City of Bath, famous for its hot springs. Many are concerned that fracking could affect the water feeding the Roman baths, which falls on the Mendips as rain, permeates through limestone aquifers, and is heated by geothermal energy. It then travels to the surface through fissures in the limestone. The hot springs have been a source of healing and worship for thousands of years.
We have a very big tourist industry here, we have a growing spa culture here, and we have the World Heritage status that is very important, that we preserve that not just for the people of Bath and North East Somerset, but a World Heritage designation means for the world. So this is important to the citizens of the world.
Councillor Crossley commissioned a report into the possible effects of fracking on the baths.
What it shows is that there's a real concern that fracking could actually interrupt the flows of water that come out as the hot springs in Bath.
Councillor Crossley is also concerned about possible contamination of the spring.
Even if we know what's going down, then that gives us concern. If it's just sand and water, then that's one issue. But if there's chemicals going down, then we are really concerned. It's not a suitable technology for this area, and we think it's scraping the barrel for energy efficiency.
UK Methane withdrew their application for an exploratory licence in Keynsham, but they now intend to apply for a full drilling licence. They have also announced they intend to commence exploratory drilling at Stoneyston and Compton Martin in the heart of the Mendips. But many feel they haven't done their homework.
If you get the local handbook of the geology of the Bristol region, it covers virtually all of the ages of rocks that you will find anywhere else in the United Kingdom. This results in a complicated geological picture, and that picture is certainly the case here on the edge of the Mendips. You only have to look at the published geology maps to realise that nobody knows the detail of the strata where the hydraulic fracturing may occur. As far as I can see, it hasn't been considered in anything like sufficient detail yet, and we need this as baseline information before the go-ahead is given to even an exploration borehole.
At a debate in Bath, UK Methane Director Gerwin Williams sought to reassure a concerned public that the environmental incidents in the US and Australia would not be repeated.
We're under different legislation. We won't be using a load of chemicals. In the UK, we're strictly governed by the Environment Agency. I mean, when Quadrilla did frack the well in St Helens, there was one.
They only used one chemical. It's a chemical called polychloride. That's the only chemical that they added to that fluid.
No, friends, let the speakers speak.
Can you give this room a 100% guarantee that this country's water supplies are going to be contaminated by only 4 chemicals?
Things have moved on, technology with respect. I mean, we're in the industry or not. And Halliburton is one of the people that's promoting the new types of fracking fluid. And one of their executives actually drank a pint of the fracking fluid. There is no way that you're going to be allowed to use anything that can't be used in the food chain.
I have heard companies claiming they're going to do hydraulic fracturing using only one chemical. Now, we met some of the representatives of that company recently, and we got them to admit that it was one chemical in the exploration stage. And then once they go into production, of course they will use the full range of chemicals that most other companies use.
Our companies wouldn't use anything that would damage the environment.
In the oil industry, you have a thing called mission creep. In other words, you do what it takes to achieve the local acceptance. And you tell them that, yeah, you're going to be pumping water and it's only got a single benign chemical. And you get the go-ahead to do that. But then your petroleum engineers and your geologists say, you know what? We could actually achieve a 10% return by adding this other ingredient. And then when they've added that ingredient, they say, well, you know what? Actually, we can get a 20% return by adding this ingredient. And before you know it, you've got a cocktail of chemicals that is way beyond the initially agreed specification. And many of these people have their bonuses based upon the increase in the share price. So they will be doing whatever it takes.
Around about April last year, we had a drought in this area. I'd like to ask how much of our precious resource is going to be pumped into this? And also, is the water going to be usable afterwards?
I agree. We work in Kent and they're the worst drought, you know, and we were talking to the Environment Agency and landowners about producing water for the crops. There are benefits in terms of water production if it's ever needed in this industry that are not demonstrated because, you know, we have more rainfall than anything else normally. To answer your question, we are working with a company in Newport called Syntec that will be able to sieve the water that comes back out of the wells and return that water back to the water course. So there isn't going to be a major effect in terms of water supplies. A comparison is that if you took 18,000 cubic metres of water for a frack, that is the same as is required to irrigate a 3-hectare cornfield in any one season or an 18-hole golf course in 1 month.
The typical frac stimulation might use 1 million, 2 million gallons of water. Those are the kind of numbers bandied around here, several thousand meters cubed. And that sounds like a lot. When I first hear that, you know, 2 million gallons, that sounds like a lot. It's something like 3 or 4 Olympic swimming pools, which suddenly sounds like not quite so much, because I can imagine an Olympic swimming pool. Would anyone have a problem with us making 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools in Bristol and saying we're going to run out of water? So I don't think that's a particular issue for shale gas at all.
But that's just one single frack. The real problem comes with full-scale drilling.
We are going to be talking about a grid of anything up to 6 wells per square mile. And each of those wells could have multiple horizontal extensions from the kickoff point. And each of those horizontal extensions will obviously need to be fracked, and in many cases it'll be multi-stage fracking. So we are looking at a conservative estimate of 100 million gallons per square mile. You cannot use salt water, it has to be fresh water.
In order for UK Methane and Eden Energy to recover the amount of gas they say they can, there would need to be over 2,000 wells in Somerset alone. That's 64 billion gallons of water, or 128,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
We may be on the brink of a gas shortage, but what would we rather have, a gas shortage or a water shortage?
When you looked at the risk to radon, what conclusion did you reach?
Again, that's what the whole point of the exploration boreholes are for. So we need to get an understanding of what is in the ground, and until you do that, you can't assess the exact risk for the radioactive materials.
With respect, that's nonsense.
Well, that's the answer you've had. There's a man in red over there.
Radon gas is a naturally occurring gas which is carcinogenic. If you hydraulically fracture strata at depth, there must be a strong possibility that you will increase radon generation at ground level.
What is the minimum depth that the fracking will fracture if it goes ahead in the Somerset area?
If the permeability is right, we will not frack in coal. We frack for shale gas. And as I said earlier, this is a progressive process. We're drilling for coal bed methane. Once we've drilled a vertical hole and tested the coal, if there's enough gas in that coal and the permeability is right.
I understand all this. All I need is a simple depth.
It's not a simple question.
Well, just say in the range then.
It isn't a question because we wouldn't frack in coal.
I didn't say that. I
You
said
did.
what? No, I didn't. I said what was the minimum depth you would be fracking at?
Drilling.
It depends on the depth of the shales.
Then just give me an answer.
We wouldn't necessarily hydraulically frack at shallow depths. People like Quadrilla and iGas and other people all over the country will go straight into hydraulic fracking. Okay. We have no intention of doing that. We're going to take people along with us in an open and transparent manner and show you that everything's safe in a step-by-step manner.
Could I have a depth?
Yeah.
What's that depth? I did ask what depth was the minimum depth you could.
We can't tell you until we drill the exploration.
Have you no idea whatsoever? Because it doesn't look like you've done your research in very much detail if you can't give me the answer to that question.
How can you research?
I don't believe no idea is known. They know the sort of depths that they will need to be drilling to. Therefore, they must have some idea of the fracking depths that were being involved. It is important that everybody knows so that the regulators can properly assess whether what is being proposed could have an adverse effect on such aspects as the groundwater table.
The Royal Society report states the risk of fractures reaching water aquifers is very low, provided gas extraction takes place at depths of many hundreds of metres or several kilometres.
But that is a very generic report applied to the whole of the United Kingdom. Knowing the geology locally, the depth of fracking they may be aiming for is less than referred to in that document.
The industry will say, well, it doesn't matter because it's so far, so deep in the ground that it will stay there. But unfortunately, again, that is just, I think, wishful thinking. Because once you actually start to fracture the seam, you create not only the fractures you want, but you create fractures that you aren't aware of, that you don't want. And the industry acknowledge that they produce pathways between different aquifers. They produce pathways between where they're doing their fracturing right up to the surface, which puts to bed this idea that if you do it deep enough in the earth, somehow it magically all stays there. Again, it's wishful thinking, it's industry hype, and it really just isn't believable.
And it's not just the water that could be contaminated when fracking creates uncontrolled and unwanted pathways in the rock bed.
There's caves all the way through the Mendips. There's hundreds of different caves, and the system is not known. So how a company can come along and say with confidence that they're not going to cause any damage, I don't know how they're so sure.
Once you start to open up the geology and provide pathways for the gas to migrate into the more open geology, you could be creating a methane time bomb under the Mendips there. And one day it could all just explode. Somebody lights a cigarette in the wrong place. And you're not going to know, unless you're walking around with a gas detector, because you're not going to smell anything.
Mark Lumley has over 40 years of caving experience and knows the subterranean landscape under the Mendips better than most.
Well, there's about 50 miles of cave that's known to be here, that's been surveyed. You've got the active streamways, which take all the water off the top of Mendip and take it through underground to come out in places like our show caves, to food producers, and ultimately into our water supplies. The risk of fracking fluids being stored on the Mendips or transported over the Mendips and that, a lot of the big stream sinks are right next to the roads, so anything that gets in there, again, is going to go straight through the caves and ultimately into our water supplies.
The construction and production of a single well takes between 350 and 400 heavy vehicle trips.
I have to say, the days of having a nice conversation sitting out in front of the diner are long gone. They run non-stop, 24 hours a day.
We've got lanes up on the top of the Mendips and to the Mendips. We don't have a main road structure, so the infrastructure isn't sufficient.
And high traffic volume inevitably increases the risk of spillage. Truman Burnett's lake was poisoned by frack water leaking from a passing truck.
And what it did, it killed everything in the pond. No frogs, no turtles, nothing. From our heaven, now it's turned into our hell.
The gas industry recorded over 1,400 spills in Colorado alone between 2003 and 2008.
Given the choice of having a rig that is fracking the subsurface geology a mile away, or a wind turbine a mile away, I know which one I'd be choosing in the proverbial heartbeat.
A well lasts for maybe 2 to 5 years, good production, then it goes downhill, then you have to build another well and another well. And so very quickly, your beautiful rural community is industrialised before your eyes. And once you've said yes, there's no way of saying no.
Oh, and by the way, once you are living above a gas field that's being developed by the hydrocarbons industry, your property value will tank.
This is pristine land somebody wants to have a little hideaway. Who do you think I could sell it to? Say, well, yeah, it's nice, but there is a little benzene coming out of the ground.
But despite the risks, the government are so determined to go ahead with the gas revolution that David Cameron has been moved to sell it through an article in the Sunday Telegraph. In it, he claims household gas bills will fall, citing America as proof. But US consumer gas prices have actually increased since the shale gas revolution began in 2000. Cameron goes on to claim that the gas industry would create 74,000 jobs, but critics say these figures are overblown and most of these jobs will come from overseas.
What we're seeing in agricultural areas in Queensland is that it is anything but good for rural landowners and rural communities. You have a massive movement of workers from elsewhere coming in because the jobs are not the sort of jobs that the local community get. They're specialised jobs. So most people get nothing from this except their community being ripped apart, their community being, particularly agricultural communities, industrialised beyond anything you can imagine.
The real benefits for jobs and regional economies are from renewables and developing the supply chain to resource that. We have some of the best renewable resources in the whole of Europe here in the UK. We should be harnessing those and creating the jobs and the manufacturing sectors to be able to really deliver jobs on the ground.
The pro-gas lobby also suggests natural gas will give the UK much-needed energy security.
In reality, anybody who has read the Treaty of Lisbon will understand that that gas is not the property of the UK. It's an EU resource. And so consequently, the reality is that if the EU believe that the UK needs to put its gas into a grid to feed the continent, then the UK government will actually have very little restriction over that decision. So any suggestion that the British people are going to be the ones who benefit is perhaps living in cuckoo land.
So what can people do to stop the all-powerful hydrocarbon industry from ruining their community?
The only thing you can do is join with your neighbours, lock the gate to the industry, and if you do that now, before they get a foothold, you've got a chance. The Lock the Gate movement in Australia is a coalition of a wide diversity of groups. It's the fastest growing social movement we have ever seen. Every community that has actually announced that they are a CSG-free community, the industry has not tried to enter. And just recently we've seen 2 companies, after having suffered blockades, just basically say it's too hard, it costs us too much. So what I want to say to people is take heart. You are not a victim in this. You can join with your neighbours, you can fight this industry, and more importantly, you can win.
The only thing I feel that we've got is the facts and the truth. That's all we've got to negotiate with, and that's all we're beating them with, is the facts and the truth, because they know the facts and the truth will defeat this. It is not good for the economy. We don't need the gas. That's a lie. We don't need it. There's enough gas out there. There's enough oil in the North Sea. They've just found some more gas out in Morecambe Bay that's going to take us past 2020. So if this is going to bridge a gap, tell renewables, we've got enough gas out there. They've also found some more in near the Shetland Islands. We do not need this gas. This is purely down to profit. At the end of the day, purely down to greed and profit. And all it is, we are just numbers, and we are sat on this rich vein of gas, and they will do and say anything to get that gas out of the ground. They're not bothered about our families, they're not bothered about our futures, they're just bothered about profit and their shareholders, and getting even richer and even more powerful. So what have we got to negotiate with? The truth and the facts. I'm sorry, they're not going to buy or buy us off with that, because it's too important for our children's futures.
Disagree, 'cause when the madman flicks a switch,